Welcome to the Rob Call Bottom Up Show, sponsored by opednews.com, available on Pacifica Radio Network, on Progressive Radio Network, on iTunes, on Stitcher, on SoundCloud, and at opednews.com/podcasts. My guest for this show is Ray McGovern. Ray is a return guest, and it's great to have you back, Ray.
Thanks, Rob.
He's a veteran CIA officer turned political activist. He was a CIA analyst from 1963 to 1990, and in the 1980s, he chaired the National Intelligence Estimates and prepared the President's Daily Brief. He's also co-founder of Veteran Intelligence Professionals for Sanity. And at Op-Ed News, we've published hundreds of Ray's articles, and it's always great to have a conversation with Ray because he's an amazing guy when it comes to stories. So welcome back to the show.
Thanks, Rob.
So there's so much to talk about. I don't know where to start, but we'll start with Donald Trump. What do you think about Donald Trump?
Well, it's easy. He's the worst U.S. president we've ever had in this country. There are all kinds of reasons why he should be removed by the 25th Amendment or impeached, as our forefathers provided, a very legal way to remove somebody who's guilty of these abuses, but not on a false legend. And so, if you can't find a reason to get rid of Trump without blaming the Russians for his victory, you're pretty lame, okay?
So what are the reasons? What you just said, there are a lot of reasons to use either the 25th Amendment, which is basically mental illness or things along those lines, or impeachment. What are the reasons that you do see that he should be gotten rid of?
Well, for one, Rob, we have 9 grandchildren. And the prospect that when they get to be my age, if they make it, they won't have clean air to breathe or clean water to drink, that's really distressing. And now he's not the only culprit, but he set back the clock when he exited the Paris Agreement. So there's that. Then there are all manner of other things. Think about those 400 children imprisoned away from their families out there.
And drugged.
Yeah. Think about the millions of people in prison. Think about him enriching the rich with his tax cuts and letting poverty blossom as it never has before. Think about all these things. If you don't have enough reason to get rid of Donald Trump, lying at every possibility, then there's something wrong with the system. Because as I like to remind people, our founders were very clear. They came out of this tradition of having to kowtow to kings, and they knew, and they said that every generation. Sorry, let me get a drink of water here. They said, Rob, that every generation, it was likely that we would have a president who would start acting like a king. Okay? Now, when that happens, they want another revolution. One is quite enough, thank you very much. It can be pretty bloody. They provided in this basic document, which came to be called the Constitution, a specific provision allowing an orderly legal way to remove that president. It's called impeachment. Now, it should have happened to George Bush, but the Democrats thought that they could win more votes in the next by-election if they didn't impeach George Bush. Now, how do I know that? I know that because Cindy Sheehan and I saw John Conyers after the Democrats took over the House again. Conyers was head of the Judiciary Committee, and we said, well, okay, going to impeach Bush? I said, no. So why not? Nancy Pelosi says that we won't win as big in the next election if we appear divisive.
Yeah, I had a conversation with John myself about that, and it got captured on video too, specifically about impeachment. Yeah.
So I said, now, Representative Congressman Conyers, it's your job. You're head of the Judiciary Committee. You actually were on the Judiciary Committee under Nixon. Why will you not move to impeach? So we don't have the votes. I said, come on, you have the votes. All you have to do is try. Well, Nancy won't let it because we won't win as big. Well, there it was. John Conyers, for whatever reason, whether it was obeisance to Nancy or whatever, he wanted to keep his chairmanship, of course. For whatever reason, he was unwilling, well, for political reasons primarily, unwilling to discharge his constitutional responsibilities. Now, I've taken the oath to support and protect the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic, about 4 times, okay? I take that seriously. I asked lawyers, I said, does that have an expiration date? And they said, no, it doesn't. So I said that to Conyers. He said, all right, get out of here. Now, that's the only time when I was arrested and convicted because I would not get out of there. The judge sentenced me and then said, look, I can't get around what you did. So I'm proud of that because when my grandchildren grow up and they say, have you ever been convicted as well as arrested? And I say, yes, I have been. And here's why. And here's what should have happened. And here's what our political situation, our Democrats in this case specifically, and in the current case as well, were too political to do their job under the Constitution. So, yeah, he should be impeached. Not only the Dems, but the Republicans need to do that. And if they can't do it, then he should be removed by virtue of the 25th Amendment, which again came later, 1967, I think, and provides for an orderly way to get rid of a president who no longer should be exercising the presidency powers.
Now, why do you think he is susceptible to the 25th Amendment?
Well, I think that he shows himself to be almost, well, he's erratic, he's irascible. He does one thing one day and one thing the next, and he lies like a trooper. So he'll say one thing one day, something else the next. And most of all, he is so subservient to the people around him that he can't even discharge his presidential duties if he wanted to. Now, take Syria, for example. Let's get real, okay? 5 months ago, the president says, we should get out of Syria. I'm pulling my troops out of Syria. Headline today, Washington Post. Well, I have it here. Headline is, we're going to stay in Syria indefinitely. The army thinks we need to. We got 2,200 people there now, and we're in there for the long haul. Now, why are we there? This is pretty much going to the core. When people say, well, is it Syria a threat to the United States? I said, no. Well, what are we doing there? I said, well, look, you can't understand U.S. policy toward that part of the world unless you understand that it is driven 90% usually by the state of Israel. Israel wants us there, and so we salute, and we're there. Now, the other percent now, of course, is larger for Saudi Arabia. They want us there as well because of Iran. But the point is, well, let me just adduce this because not many people know it. Back, 5 years ago, 2013, there was a so-called chemical event outside of Damascus, at a place called Ghouta, immediately blamed on Bashar al-Assad. We know it wasn't Bashar al-Assad. It was the rebels. How do we know that? Nobody knows this because the only English language newspaper it appeared in was the Belfast Telegraph. How many of you read the Belfast Telegraph regularly? Nobody. Okay, all right. So what did it say? It said that there was a judicial proceeding in southern Turkey after the local gendarmes caught rebels going from Europe through Turkey down into southern Syria with the precursors for sarin gas, okay? Now, there were 7 of them. Were they brought to trial? They were brought to trial. As soon as they got a jury going, all of a sudden, word came from Ankara, let them go. And they dispersed. Now, how do I know that? It was parliamentary testimony by 2 very gutsy congresspeople in Ankara, okay? Now, we knew before that, but let me get back to the subject here. Okay, so there's a chemical event in Syria, during that time, there was a new New York Times correspondent. Actually, she was bureau chief in Jerusalem. Her name was Jody Ruderin. Now, to her credit, she said, maybe I got an idea. I'll go talk to the Israeli officials that always see me because I'm New York Times, and I'll ask them, what's their preferred outcome in Syria? And so she did. There were all kinds of officials she talked to, including the former consul general in New York. And she said, no, what's your preferred outcome? And Alon Pincus, who was the former consul general in New York, said, now, Jody, this doesn't sound very humanitarian, but our preferred outcome is no outcome. And she says, traduisez s'il vous plaît.
Instability, constant, chronic instability.
Yeah. So he says, yeah, as long as, well, we look at it, he said, this is all quotations. We look at it as a playoff game where you don't want either side to win, and you surely don't want either side to lose. We would prefer the blood to keep flowing as long as Sunni and Shia are at each other's throats, not only in Syria, but in the rest of the area. Quote, Israel has nothing to fear from Syria. Wow. So what was this chemical event in Ghouta all about? It was to get the U.S. in with both feet. Now, did Obama do it? No, he didn't. And in a subsequent, years later, interview with Jeffrey Goldberg, he was very proud of that. He says, not only did I not go by the playbook, by the establishment, but I'm glad I did it. And besides, he says, Jeffrey, guess what? During that critical week, the last part of August 2013, I was visited by the Director of National Intelligence, James Clapper. And he kind of sidled up to me and he says, thanks for receiving me because I wasn't announced. But what you need to know, Mr. President, is, how do I put this, that the Syrians did that attack in Ghouta? Well, it's not a slam dunk, Mr. President. It's not a slam dunk. You get my drift? Obama telling Jeffrey Goldberg of the Atlantic. What does that mean? That means that Clapper himself was afraid that the few honest people left working in the intelligence apparatus might go to the press and say, look, this is a crock. It wasn't sarin from Syria. It was sarin from our proteges, our progressive rebels who had the precursors, and we could prove it. So what I'm saying here is that that's the name of the game. The Israelis want this thing to go on. And every time the Syrians seem to be winning, as they were in August of 2013, as they were in April of last year, there's a chemical event. And who comes in? Whether it's Tomahawk cruise missiles or whether it's boots on the ground, the U.S. comes in. So
it was theater. It's you're basically saying it's theater.
What's that?
It's theater.
Well, it's theater, but it's run, the director and the background and the scenario is all written by Israel. And American people need to know that. I mean, how bad does it have to get? How many more people need to be killed? In Syria, we're talking about at least 500,000 people already killed. All the neighboring countries, including Turkey and Jordan and others, have millions of refugees. And we can't get any straight story on this, even in the progressive media. Now, I'll give you an example.
Oh, wait, I want to follow up one more thing.
Yeah, sure.
Right now, and I think you've addressed this in some other talks or interviews, the people that Syria are going after with the help of Russia, that the U.S. is opposing, they're Al-Qaeda, right?
They are.
Talk a little bit about that. Give us a little background about that.
Well, Al-Qaeda, of course, was in Iraq, was created by our own stupid policy. There's some real cynics that say, well, it was deliberate. If you profiteer on war, if you want another star in your lapel, that's not a stupid policy. It keeps the war going. It keeps the policy going of no preferred outcome. So that's possible, okay? So Al-Qaeda comes in and we're pulling around with it. We're arming progressive rebels. and nothing's happening. And then in September of 2015, Putin takes Obama aside at the UN, September. He says, now, Mr. President, you probably know from your intelligence that we've been sending warplanes and all manner of other arms into Syria. Just want to let you know that the day after tomorrow, we're going to start using them. We don't think you're real serious about this ISIS threat. And so we're gonna do it. What you should be doing, we're gonna knock out all those oil tanks coming into Turkey. We're gonna finish this thing off. So, Mr. President, we would like you to join us. Now, that's your choice. But my foreign minister, Sergei Lavrov, is ready. If you tell John Kerry to meet with him, I think we can work this thing out together. Now, to his credit, Obama did that. And what happened? They worked for 11 months and they finally got a ceasefire. Okay. And then what happened? Within 10 days after the ceasefire, the US Air Force raided known Syrian army positions and killed a whole bunch of people, over 100. Okay. Now, what did that do? That ended the ceasefire. How did Putin react? Scratched his head and he says, we come up with these agreements at the highest level. President Obama and I were in on it. And then all of a sudden, people in Washington don't get the word, or they do some other policy. It's really hard to understand who's running things in Washington. Well, he should be confused, because that is the key to a lot of this. Trump is no more in charge than Obama was. There is such a thing as a deep state.
I just wrote down deep state. I want you to talk about the deep state.
Well, let me refer, probably it's best to refer to known circumstances here. The deep state is a entrenched bunch of very powerful people in the military, in the security services, and intelligence, people who really kind of have a big budget and are notorious for telling presidents what to do. Let me give you just a little vignette here. The deep state, in the person of Peter Strzok of the FBI, we have his text messages to his lover. And we can see there that he is appointed to be in charge of Hillary Clinton's inquiry, the investigation into whether she violated the law. He let her off scot-free. He drafted the explanatory little memo before they even saw her. Then he was put on the Russian thing. Okay, what's the Russian thing? The Russian thing was dreamed up to make sure that Hillary Clinton's accusations against Trump that he was in Putin's pocket would be heeded. Okay, now what happens? Well, Trump wins. Why is that important? Well, obviously, nobody expected him to win. They all thought Hillary was going to win. What does that mean? That means they felt completely free to play fast and loose with the law and with the Constitution, as what Peter Strzok called it, an insurance policy to make sure that Hillary won and that Trump lost. Okay. Now, what happens? They're not even careful about the paperwork. Trump wins, and all of a sudden, they're really running scared. Brennan is running scared. So what happens? Well, they commissioned this U.S. intelligence assessment. It's called the Intelligence Community Assessment, but the only correct word there is assessment. It's not the intelligence community. It's not 17 agencies. It's not 3 agencies. It's handpicked analysts from NSA, CIA, and FBI, and they come up with this assessment. Putin told Russian intelligence to hack into the DNC and give them to Julian Assange. Okay, now, that's the memo that these 4 people, head of the CIA, John Brennan, head of the FBI, James Comey, the head of NSA, Admiral Rogers, and the head of the National Intelligence Structure, James Clapper, they go to the president-elect, okay? This is January 6th. Now, put yourself in the president-elect's position. Here he has 4 of the most powerful people in the world, not to mention the US, and they come in and they say, now, Mr. Trump, Mr. President-elect, we have this assessment, and it really says that you wouldn't have won without Putin helping you. And this is an intelligence community assessment, and so we want to let you know this because we're going to publish it like today, and so you should know. And then by prearrangement, they say, now we three have to leave. We're going to leave the head of the FBI with you. His name is James Comey. Hello, Mr. Comey. Okay, so he leaves. Now, Comey, what does he do? He says, Mr. President, I don't know. I'm really embarrassed to do this, but we have this dossier, and it alleges that you were consorting with prostitutes in Moscow a few years ago, and it has all. Now it's not confirmed, of course, but there are several scurrilous things here, and we just want to let you know that we have we think the press has it. It's gonna so just so you know. Now, Rob, you've been around long enough to know that this is an age-old introduction to a new president who rules the roost in Washington. If I were Trump, I would have said, Comey, you get out of my sight here, clean out your desk. You only have a couple of weeks, clean it out real good because you ain't getting back into the FBI headquarters.
Presidents never did that with J. Edgar Hoover, and we know that he had that kind of information on everybody.
That's right. But, Trump is new to the game. That's why they hate him. They think this he is an upstart and they won't be able to be controlled. So instead of waiting a month or two, I would have said, get out of here, Comey. I know what the name of this game is. If you're giving me scurrilous stuff that's unconfirmed, I know what you're trying to do. Who did you give it to in the press, by the way? Oh, okay. Get out of here. I don't want to talk to you. I would have fired him as soon as I became president. And instead, he waited 2 months or so. Now, what did he say to one of those pundits after he fired Comey? He said, I fired him because of this Russian thing. Aha, says everybody. He's trying to cover up his collusion with Russia. It wasn't that at all. It was what Comey was trying to do to him. By that time, Trump knew quite well about this campaign to nullify the election, really, which they're still trying to do. Witness what the New York Times printed yesterday in the way of a anonymous op-ed, and what old trustee Bob Woodward is doing in his book. So there's a soft coup going on. The easy description of these folks is the deep state. And the only thing that's different this time, Rob, and it's really very important, is that there are 3 chairs of House committees, Intelligence, Judiciary, and Oversight, who seem to think that Congress has the prerogative to oversee what these security and intelligence agencies are doing. And by all intents and purposes, it looks like they're serious about fulfilling their obligations and under the Constitution. So the issue is joined, really. Why? Because they have the paperwork. They have the paperwork showing that Comey, Brennan, Loretta Lynch, the Attorney General, the stakes could not be higher. Now, who's going to win? Well, up till now, in my experience, the deep state always wins. This may be a little different because Devin Nunes, for example, in the Intelligence Committee in the House, is he a partisan? Of course he is. He supported Trump from the beginning, but he also has this thing about the Constitution, and he has the documents. And so he has an interviewer ask him, Mr. Devin Nunes, if these people are guilty, would they be brought to trial? And Nunes says, if they're guilty, they will be brought to trial. We are Congress. We establish these agencies. We fund them. We oversee them. If they are guilty, yes, you bet.
But Nunes has also withheld information, and there have been some problems with Nunes too, haven't there?
Like what?
Last year there was a big brouhaha about how he was withholding information, keeping it confidential, that was significant, that the American public should be able to see.
You've been reading the New York Times, Rob. No, really. What he did somebody tipped him off to the fact that people were being surveilled under a bogus warrant or under a bogus FISA warrant. So he got the information, brought it down to the White House where it's secure. The only thing he didn't do, which people normally do, is make sure that his co-chair, the guy from California, what's his name, Adam Schiff, knew ahead of time. So, I've looked at Nunes really, really carefully, and I've seen that what he's done does withstand close scrutiny, and there's a lot of knives out for him, and that's why I'm perpetually wondering how long he'll be able to keep this. If it hadn't been for the support of Trey Gowdy in Judiciary and Bob Goodlatte from Tradition, Trey Gowdy from Oversight and Goodlatte from Judiciary, I don't think that Nunes would have hung in there, but he has. And let me tell you one other thing I know about Nunes. You know about the USS Liberty incident where the Israelis killed 34 of our sailors and tried to sink the ship, killing all 300. No U.S. official owned up to the fact that the Israelis did that deliberately. It's in the intercepts. It's an American flag. Perform your mission. Shoot it down. Okay, so it's right there. Now, no one except a fellow named Devin Nunes from the Central Valley of California. How do I know that? Well, I'm real close with a lot of the Liberty survivors, the USS Liberty survivors, and Terry Halbardier, a young seaman from Texas, was the one who prevented them from being all killed, not just 34, but all. Okay, now how did that happen? After the Israelis had napalmed the deck, after they had shot out all the radars that were working at the time, there was one that hadn't been working. The Israelis didn't know about it, but Terry Halbardier did, and he said, Captain McGonigal, I think I can get that. He's got some baling wire here. I think I can get that plugged in. We get an SOS out. And McGonigal says, yeah, right. What are you going to do? Swim across the napalm? Halbardier, request permission, sir. McGonigal, permission granted. He does skate across the thing, plugs that thing in, gets an SOS out. The Israelis intercept it, of course, and get out of Dodge, okay? That's the only way that they escaped complete murder. Now, what's the point here? Terry Halbardier ends up working for a fellow named Devin Nunes in the Central Valley of California, okay? Nunes hears about this and petitions the Navy, takes years, finally gets permission to give Halbardier the Silver Star, I guess it is, okay? Now, that's the second highest. That's just below the Medal of Honor. So I hear about this. I'm on the next plane out there. I'm in Visalia, California, small office that Devin Nunes has there with about 5 or 6 survivors. And he has this little ceremony, little local press there. And one of them says, now, Terry Halbardier, would you show us your shrapnel wounds? I've never seen a stomach look like that before, okay? And if you want to know what PTSD is really like, talk to one of the USS Liberty survivors. Suffice it to say that he's the only congressman, the only person in the active Navy, the only person in our government that had the guts to call attention to the USS Liberty incident, to appropriately award the fellow who saved the rest of the crew. And he did this without any political motivation that I could decipher. After all, well, people say, well, yeah, he's from the Central Valley of California. There aren't too many Jewish people there. Well, all right, if you want to be that cynical, you can be. But this was a gutsy move. Now, why do I adduce all that stuff? Well, because he's acting very, very strangely. He's acting as though he has real oversight power. And that's why I call attention to this, Rob. This is very different. The others would have all submitted, bowed their head, and submitted to the deep state long before.
Okay, let me interrupt you a little bit, because
sure.
I want to hear more from you about your ideas about the deep state. But first, I need to do an ID for the show. So this is the Rob Call Bottom Up Show. I'm going to pause a moment on the video so that there's a dead zone. So when I'm editing this for audio, I can find it easy. And my guest for this show is Ray McGovern. He is a veteran CIA officer turned political activist. He was a CIA analyst from 1963 to 1990, and in the 1980s, he chaired the National Intelligence Estimates and prepared the President's Daily Brief. He's also co-founder of Veteran Intelligence Professionals for Sanity. So I want to know a lot more about the deep state. Who are they? Where do they come from? You mentioned the heads of the intelligence agencies. Are they part of the deep state?
Yeah, they're sort of like the Praetorian Guard.
And who else? Who tells them what to do?
Who tells them what to do? They do among one another. They are pretty much the power here. What you have, Rob, what I call now, is the military, industrial, congressional, intelligence, media, academia, think tank complex. Okay, let's do that again. Military, industrial, congressional, intelligence, media, academe, and think tank. That's what's pretty much got all the money and pretty much controls things. Now, Eisenhower, of course, only said military industrial. You probably know that he wanted to say military industrial congressional. And guess who also said military industrial congressional? A fellow named Senator John McCain. Military industrial congressional. Now, who knew better than John McCain what power that exercised? So here's the situation. The campaign in 2016 is in train. This upstart comes, Donald Trump. He's not really well known. And what does he do? My God, he criticizes the intelligence agencies. He criticized the FBI. I mean, the guy is a loose cannon. What's going to happen if he comes in? Oh, he's not going to win. Well, as we know from these text messages from the second highest guy in the counterintelligence part of the FBI, they were afraid that there was an outside chance he might win. So he says to his lover, we can't let that happen. So we'll have to do sort of like an insurance policy. It's sort of like, you know, you're 40, you're not going to die, but you take an insurance policy out. Anyway, well, what was that insurance policy? We know now because we have some of the other text messages. All of a sudden, Trump starts to be a contender. Okay, and what does Peter Strzok do? Well, first thing, he hastens the end of the inquiry into Hillary Clinton. She gets out of jail free. Okay, then he homes in on Trump for 8 months. He homes in on Trump, and then when Bob Mueller is appointed, his lover Nisa Page says, "My God, are you going to join the Mueller investigation?" Now, listen carefully. This is in the text messages. Here's Peter Strzok. After 8 months of looking at Russiagate, any ties between the Trump campaign and the Russian, he says, Lisa, I don't know. I don't think I want to. I mean, you got this? Listen, quote, there's no big there, period, end quote. There's no big there. Now, does he join the Mueller campaign? Well, yeah, maybe I could find a there, or maybe John Brennan will help me manufacture a there. So, yeah, it's worth the game. So he joins Mueller, and then Mueller finds out from the IG of the FBI or the Justice Department that this guy is crooked as that he's trying to do everything he can to help Hillary win and to defeat Trump. So he's cashiered. Now, why do I mention all that? Well, it's all right there on the record. Do people who read the New York Times know that? No, they don't know that. So it's not like I'm making it up. It's in the record. So this is the deep state, right? Now, what's John Brennan doing? Well, he's causing the dossier to be written. Now, who's paying for the dossier? Well, most people know the Democratic Party and Hillary Clinton through a cutout. But who else is paying for the dossier? The FBI.
Now, you're talking about the Steele dossier.
I am.
Yes.
So this is the former British civil servant who's done this dossier for a lot of money. And it's just exactly what Comey thinks he needs to get a FISA warrant, Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, on people like Carter Page and others, so that they can really home in and find out what's going on in the Trump campaign, just in case, okay? Now, my point is simply this. People say to me, Ray, for God's sake, the very top level, Justice Department, FBI, CIA, and I mean, all of them involved in this corruption, all of this involved in unlawful activity. Come on, how can you explain that? Very easy, say I. Very easy. And here it is. You got it? They all expected Hillary to win hands down. So you not only take liberties with the Constitution and the law, you're not even careful about your paper trail. Whoa. Well, the point is here that Nunes and other chairs of relevant committees have the paper. And so the question is whether they will be able to exert their constitutional prerogative to really oversee these people. And if they're brought to trial, can you imagine the former Attorney General, former head of FBI, the former head of CIA being convicted and put away? Well, it's hard to imagine.
I can imagine that along with a couple of presidents as well.
Well, that's harder to imagine, but
I would sure it's not for me. It would be it's a fantasy.
Well, yeah, the wish can be
pleasant one.
But I'm talking concrete things here. These guys are demonstrably.
But wait a second, Ray. You didn't answer my question really. Okay. I asked you about the deep state. And you're basically telling me that the heads of the intelligence agencies are the heads of the deep state, and they're the ones who make all the decisions?
I'm saying that there's a military, industrial, congressional, intelligence, media, academia, think tank complex, okay?
Yeah.
So let's just go with the first ones. Military, intelligence, military, industrial, congressional, intelligence, media. Media is the big new element. Media is completely in league with these folks. Read the New York Times, read the Washington Post. You'll see, just in the last couple of days, they're like this. They're trying to make sure.
But who are the people telling the heads of the intelligence agencies? I don't believe that they are the ones who have the agenda.
Well, you better believe it, Rob. Let me just tell you that when you talk about who owns the media, well, you know, there are about, 6 corporations, multi.
So now we're getting somewhere.
They own the media, and they in turn are like this with Wall Street. And, you know, the key here is who profits from all this? And I use the term advisedly, cui bono, who profits? And Pope Francis, of all people, put his finger on it exactly 3 years ago when he spoke before Congress. He said the main problem is the blood-soaked arms trade. And all the Congress people got up on their feet. It's almost like Bibi Netanyahu is there, you know. Well, and then you watch them closely. They're looking to see if the latest envelope from Lockheed is in their vest pocket or the one from Raytheon, you know. It was giving his hypocrisy a bad name. He put his finger on it, okay? It's the blood-drenched arms trade. Now, what does that mean as it has practical application? It means you can't have a détente, much less a rapprochement with Russia. It means that if there's supposed to be peace on the Korean Peninsula, that's not allowed either, because what are we going to do when we have all these ABMs to sell, all those people out there in the East, ABMs, that anti-ballistic missiles that don't work anyway? What are we going to do if there's no tension in Central Europe? I mean, hello, once we started putting sanctions in, well, then we could build a common European battle tank. And man, it's gravy.
So what you're saying then is that the goal of the deep state is to do exactly what Israel has tried to do for Syria and the Middle East, which is to keep the uncertainty, keep imbalance, keep chaos running, so that there are lots of there are literally trillions of dollars spent on weapons.
That's basically it. Yeah. And nobody calls them on it. You know, when you have people with moral authority, let's take Pope Francis again. Okay. So he says this: the main problem is the blood-drenched arms trade. Okay. Trump is going to visit the Vatican. On his way, he stops in Saudi Arabia. What does he do there? Oh, he concludes the biggest arms deal in the history of mankind, over 100 billion. Now, I say, oh, this is great, because now he's going to the Vatican. Francis will either tell him not to come, or he'll confront him. What happens? My progressive Catholic friends say, oh, did you see what Francis did? I say, well, no, he didn't smile for the first 3 photo ops. I said, what did he do then? He said, oh, then he smiled, then he smiled. And then what did he do? He didn't object, he didn't raise it. Now, here was a golden opportunity. All I'm saying here is that even people that you expect to be able to look to for moral leadership on these questions, they punch when push comes to shove. That's exactly what Francis did. What did he do? He gave Trump an encyclical.
Who do you look to for moral leadership? Who are the leaders who are really standing up?
You may or may not know this, but I'm a sort of a spiritual person. The person I try to follow is a fellow named, well, Arabic is Isa. We call him Jesus. He was born in Nazareth, or born in Bethlehem. And, you know, people kind of have a really strange idea of what he stood for. He stood for the kinds of things that I try to stand for. And if he had just kind of ceased and desisted, you know, if he'd only had a kind of realized what the power realities were there, with the encrusted oppressive religious hierarchy, and then the Romans on top of that, if he had only just played ball, you know, he could have died. He could have died a famous Hebrew theologian safely in his bed. But he knew that. What did he do? Well, he confronted the authorities. He confronted them for the injustices that the poor people suffered there. And what happened to him? He got killed. Now, did he know he was going to get killed? If you didn't know you're going to get killed by doing those kinds of things in those days, you weren't really paying attention. So what am I saying here? I'm saying here that that if you want to be a follower of the fellow that I follow, Jesus, you can't just go to church. You can't just repeat prayers. You got to do what he did, all right? And that's what I'm trying to do. And so that moral leadership comes from there, and from the Jesuits that came out of Salvador, for example, the ones who knew about the poor people, the ones who followed Jesus's dictum to find him in the poor. So when Oscar Romero, for example, said, ser cristiano hoy en día significa no temer, no callar por miedo. That means to be a Christian today means not to be afraid, not to be silent because out of fear. Then, you know, I think that's what we need to do, because the mark.
And of course, in South America, the movement of Catholic priests, the liberation theology, was massively attacked and crushed by the CIA and Pope Paul, with many of them being killed or defrocked.
Yeah, that's what you get when you have an encrusted oppressive hierarchy. Actually, Bill Casey and Pope John Paul II were like this, you know? So you're quite right. But my allegiance is not to the Catholic hierarchy or to the Pope. My allegiance is to the fellow they're supposed to be preaching and representing. And, you know, I find great gratification because there are lots of people who feel the same way I do. We support each other. We don't look for immediate success, you know? That's the big thing. As I go around the country talking to people, Americans seem to be reluctant to try anything significant unless there's a realistic prospect that they'll be successful. And Dan Berrigan, who also is a follower of this Jesus fellow that I mentioned, you know, after the Catonsville 9 got all wrapped up for burning draft cards and putting their blood on them, they're in the only federal facility in Catonsville, Maryland, which is the post office, right? So Dan writes in his memoir, in his autobiography, he says, I knew this was a big thing. We had done a big thing, and I knew that I'd be called a commie, I'd be called stupid, I'd be called an idiot. So was this worth doing? And, says Jan, I came to this realization. The good is worth doing because it's good. Now, results are not unimportant, but they're secondary to the goodness of the act. Not unimportant, success or results, but secondary to the goodness of the act. The act will be seen and people can react accordingly. Now, just then, you remember Berrigan was a poet and he had a great sense of humor. He says, just then, the door opens up and a paradigm of an FBI inspector stalks in. And he looks at my brother Phil, also in his clerics, I say, you again, I'm going to change my religion. Dan writes, no higher compliment could ever come to my brother Phil. So what's the lesson there? You have to keep your sense of humor in this work. Now, is it going to be successful? That's secondary. Are we going to be faithful? Are we going to try to right these injustices? Are we going to try to get rid of people like Trump on real reasons, not concocted ones? Are we going to stay truthful? Are we going to say the end justifies the means? Not me. I'm not going to say the end justifies the means. I'm just going to say, look, you got so many means and you got so many reasons to get rid of this guy. Get rid of him, but don't blame it on the Russians.
I want to ask you another question about how you made a decision to do some of the steps you've taken that got you arrested. But first, I need to do another show ID. This is the Rob Call Bottom Up show, and I'm going to pause again. My guest for this show is Ray McGovern. He's a veteran CIA officer, and he is co-founder of Veteran Intelligence Professionals for Sanity. So, Ray, you talked earlier about how you got yourself arrested and convicted, and you've been arrested multiple times for civil disobedience. I'm interested in what gets you to make the decision to cross the threshold, to take the step from being a protester to being someone who's arrested. What is your thinking?
Mm-hmm. Well, Rob, a lot of people put it this way, say, when did you fall off your horse, on the way to Damascus? Or when did you get right? And, they're always disappointed because I have to explain quite honestly that it was a straight line. What I did at the CIA was analysis. We were hermetically sealed off from operations. We didn't know what our operational guys were doing on the other side of those turnstiles that divided our building when I first joined. And we were able to do our work. I worked on the Soviet Union, and I was able to tell the president almost always what I thought. It was good work, okay? Then I retired. When the Soviet Union imploded, I said, I'm 50 years old now. I'll take a big cut of my annuity, but I can go. I can get an annuity, immediate one. So go. Patted myself on the back, say, nice job on Russia, right? I wanted to work in the inner city, which I did. Now, 10 years later, I see my former colleagues deliberately manufacturing, forging evidence to justify a war of aggression against Iraq. I said, oh my God, what's going on here? Now, there were several other people who exited about the same time I did, and we all compared notes, and we formed this Veteran Intelligence Professionals for Sanity to spread some truth around so that if there were a chance Bush would listen to us, we would tell him directly, as we did on the same day Colin Powell told all those lies before the UN on February 5, 2003. It was about 6 weeks before the war. We told him this was a crock, and you really need to broaden your circle of advisors beyond those clearly bent on a war for which we see no cogent reason and from which we believe the unintended consequences are likely to be catastrophic. We take no pride in having been right about that, but we were right. Now, do people listen to us now? Don't listen to us now either. Do we keep telling them the truth? Yeah, we do. So that's when it really started. Now, when I saw things like torture, I mean, my God. When I saw the head of the CIA, who was Porter Goss at the time, go down with the vice president, Dick Cheney, beating on the door of John McCain saying, look, you have legislation, you got to give an exception for CIA. We have to be able to still torture. Okay, can you do that? McCain says, no. Then he said, okay. People don't know that. McCain knew damn well that the CIA had an exception. Even the Army manual had a
Well, you're saying that McCain okayed it eventually?
Well, he had put on a big show and got legislation passed, but that very legislation allowed the CIA to do whatever the hell it wanted to do. And the Army manual, which was given such PR, contained a secret annex, Annex M, which allowed the Army to do some of the same enhanced interrogation.
Wait. We're running out of time, so I want to be really clear. You've given us some history on some of the reasons you were outraged, but what actually went through your head when it was time or shortly before that led you to actually take the steps to engage in civil disobedience? What was the first time you engaged in civil disobedience, and what were your thoughts on it?
Okay. First time I remember vividly was the 13th of January, 2003. Now, by that time I knew we were going to start a war with Iraq. By that time I knew what had happened in a little village in Baghdad many years before, when smart bombs from the US came through the ventilation shafts and killed 413 women and children in a shelter in this place, Al-Amariya, okay? So my Catholic worker friend said, Ray, we're going to have a little liturgy right in front of the White House. This is really important. We're going to call attention to what happened. We're going to call attention to what's about to happen. We want you to come with us. And I said, right, his name was Art Laffin. I said, Art, I'm going to write an op-ed today that will change everything. And he looked at me and he said, so I joined them the next day. It was freezing cold. And that's the first time I was arrested. Now, get arrested with Catholic workers. You'll find it's the most joyful experience you've ever experienced.
Well, I've interviewed a lot of people about getting arrested, including Dan Ellsberg, and he's told me about the joy of getting arrested, really. And well, I know you've been arrested with Dan Ellsberg too, because I was there documenting it.
Yeah. Well, I brought some bread with me. I had some bread, and we had a paraliturgy. The women were in the next cell. And we had.
Oh, wait! I wanted to take a step back. Sure. You got yourself arrested there. When did you know you were going to get arrested? I'm trying to get this idea of how you crossed the threshold from never having been arrested to becoming arrested. What was going on in your head?
There were hundreds of people there that day on the 13th of January, 2003. And there were 8 of us that decided that we would not move off the sidewalk when we were told to. And we knew ipso facto that would mean arrest. I had come to that before then because I knew that Art was asking me to do that. And I was quite willing and able to do that.
Well, wait. This is the thing I'm trying to get to.
All right.
So this happened. You made up your mind before the day that it happened.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I'm trying to get to the thought process that took you to cross that threshold, to make the decision.
That was sui generis because that was the first time. Now, the last time I was arrested was when the nominee to head the CIA, proven in documents to have led the waterboarding of al-Nashiri in Thailand at the first CIA black site, when she was allowed to appear before the Senate Intelligence Committee, and when asked, did you supervise the waterboarding of al-Nashiri, she was allowed to say, well, Senator, I'd love to answer that question, but it's classified. And the senator was out of time. And so the chair said next. And so nobody got to ask, Ms. Haspel, who is it that classified that information? And she would have to say, well, Senator, I did. So she was allowed to classify all the information that showed that she supervised the first black site where people were waterboarded. And that's when I got up spontaneously this time, okay? I was dressed to blend in with the indigenous, for God's sake. I had a tie on, right? So I went up there, I said, Senators, excuse the interruption here, but you're entitled to a straight answer as to whether she was the head of that site. And you know, for Capitol Police to send on me. And as the press said, they escorted me out.
I hate to interrupt you.
No problem.
You're such a great storyteller, but I'm trying to, the first time, this sui generis time,
right?
You went through a process that enabled you to make that decision so that you were ready on the day that you were arrested. I'm trying to get, what was the process in your head that allowed you to flip a switch so that afterwards, in the future, you were able to, on the spur of a moment, decide you were going to get arrested? Because you'd already been through the thinking. You'd already gone through the journey of figuring out how you're willing to do that. So the first time was before that one time in front of the White House. What were your thoughts that took you there?
Well, Rob, as I said, I talked with Art Laffin, a Catholic worker, Dorothy Day, Catholic worker in Washington. He explained how they had been at Almeria, where this shelter for women and children underground had incinerated 413 women and children who thought they'd be safe there by these smart bombs coming through the ventilators. He said he saw the flesh still hanging on the sides of the walls, and he had pictures, and he talked to the men who came back and found this carnage, okay? Now, that, you got to let your whole self, your emotions, sort of affect your thinking process. And I said, well, this is going to happen again. My God, I knew that my former colleagues had perjured themselves, had in order to advance career-wise, they had told lies that would justify a war that I knew would be this terrible. And so it was a gradual awakening thing, but it was an easy choice. And I think the key here, really, Rob, is that you have to trust. You have to know who to trust. And I know these Catholic workers. I mean, they do the real stuff. They live with the poor, and they give shelter, and they do all this stuff, and they know what's going on. They're really bright. And so with this trusted, my Irish grandmother used to say, show me your company, and I'll tell you who you are. Well, I was in that prison. I said, well, Grandma, all right, what do you think? And I could seriously, all right. My nieces and nephews have spent a lot of time in prison as well back in the day in Ireland. So the other thing is this, and this I think is important. When I got arrested and beat up, actually, at George Washington University, simply for turning my back on Hillary Clinton, as she bragged about human rights and how they're being violated in Iran, right in front of her, okay. Long story short, my Veterans for Peace crowd got the word out, and Hillary Clinton received thousands and thousands of emails and telephone calls. And why? And this is the point. Not because something happened to McGovern, but look at McGovern. He's got this kind of hair, right? He's a pretty old guy. Now, Americans don't mind young people getting beat up. They got to come into them. But old people? I mean, Americans don't like to see old people, whether they have hair like this.
And you got bruised and beat up badly there. I remember.
Yeah. So that, what I'm saying here is that for those of you who are of an age that I am, or who maybe even are younger, maybe not even 70, and have this color hair, I used to say brown, now it's white. Well, you have a distinct advantage, and you ought to put it into play. Because if young people don't see people like us considering this situation seriously enough to put their bodies into it, what good example do they have? Where are the Dan Ellsbergs?
Okay, so I want to keep getting into the how-to part of this.
Sure. Mm-hmm.
You've said that you basically described a sense of outrage that you felt for right. the horror that was being engaged in, and then you described that you trusted the people you were doing this with.
Right.
But I would imagine that when you worked for the CIA, you probably couldn't have imagined getting yourself arrested like that. Could you have?
You're largely right. Yeah, I was kind of, I came out of a parochial background, and I had a lot to learn, even at the end of my career in the CIA. I treasured my friendship with George H.W. Bush. We're pretty close. We stayed in close after he left Washington, and we stayed in touch, and I did. And then I learned, God, I learned the things that I didn't know, even though I briefed him every other morning. So, you know, it's kind of you see so many people with clay feet, not only in politics, but in church, in all areas of life, that you grow up, okay? And then you say, well, what are you going to do about this, McGovern? And the answer to that is nothing. Dan Berrigan said the difference between doing something and doing nothing is everything.
We've got to wrap. We're at our time limit. Anything you want to finish with?
Yeah, I want to make the point that I've been in Washington for 55 years now, and I've seen a lot of change. But the biggest change of all is the fact that we no longer have, in any real sense, a free media. That is big. I go up to New York to my old friends, and they say, Ray, where do you get that stuff? It's not in the New York Times. Well, if you don't find better sources than the New York Times folks, you know, the Republic is in real peril, because you don't get the truth anymore, not to mention the comprehensive truth, all the news that's fit to print. From the Times or the Post or the Wall Street Journal, you have to tune into opednews.com, or, don't forget now, RayMcGovern.com.
RayMcGovern.com.
If you don't get it, you don't get it.
All right. Thanks so much, Ray. Great interview. Really appreciate it.